This was a cult headed by Jim Jones, who ended up setting up a compound in Guyana. Without spoiling too much, he did things in that compound that would only be surpassed by 9/11 in terms of American civilian deaths. Jim Jones was a communist priest. This is very self-contradictory, of course. To understand him, we can listen to tape Q134 as labeled by the FBI agents who collected it from the Guyana compound after it was all over.
As a child, I was undoubtedly one of the poor in the community. I had less of material comforts, although my mother made every effort to give me what she could. My dad was ill, an invalid from World War I, a very bitter, cynical person, and spent so much time being engrossed in his own pain that he finally debilitated his health. I left my father's home early and had to go to work and live away from the home because I brought the only black young man in the town home to visit my dad, and my dad said that he could not come in. I said, then I shan't, and I did not see my dad for many years, always identifying with something other than the American society, because it had not given me a feeling of acceptance.
So Jim Jones had this relatively difficult upbringing. He was an outcast. He was an anti-racist in the 40s. There seem to have been two avenues through which he tried to cope with reality. On one hand, there was religion.
Because I was never accepted, or I didn't feel accepted, I joined the most extreme Pentecostal church, the Oneness, because they were the most despised. They were the rejects of the community. I found immediate acceptance, and I must say, in all honesty, as much love as I could interpret love. They were persecuted beyond measure for their beliefs. But after some time, intellectually I outgrew Pentecostalism, but still a rebel, still not a part of the society, never accepted, born, as it were, on the wrong side of the tracks. Thus, and facing the middle years, my memory dims, or perhaps it's because I have kept down much of the pain in my life in order to endure it suppressed, because it seems that I've had a great deal of pain for people who at least live in the Western world, advanced societies. My pain cannot compare to those of the Third World who suffer such misery beyond human description.
The other organization with which he associated himself were the Communists.
I rebelled against a certain macho-type racist, and I took money from him and did all sorts of sensitive things with it. I had a way of controlling the money of the salesmen, and they brought it in, and giving them credits for their sales. And I even shifted some of his money to another man who had a problem, as I believe, and I'm vague about it, but it seemed like a handicapped child. Then I took some money myself and utilized it for personal indulgence. Anyway, I was apprehended. The questions arose. Something was wrong with the books. And this communist supervisor shielded me, utterly protected me. I don't know what he did. He must have made some adjustments with the company finances and utterly protected me from what would have been a terrible charge. Anyway, you can imagine the endearment I felt for this man.
In the end, Jones became a pastor. It is a bit vague as to why he did so, because in the tape, he on one hand mentions wanting to infiltrate the church as a communist, but on the other he speaks about how he was inspired to join by another pastor.
I decided, how can I demonstrate my Marxism? The thought was, infiltrate the church. So I consciously made a decision to look into that prospect. Particularly was it inspired upon me, I say to infiltrate the church, it really was brought to my attention by a very kindly, and I pause because of, again, feeling that it can reflect on others, a man who had a great deal of conscience that seemed to be compatible to my views, who was a church administrator of a denomination, and he encouraged me to think about being a pastor, and so I did.
Skipping forward, in the 50s he opens up a church in Indianapolis, in a mixed-race neighborhood. On one hand, he works dutifully for the community, setting up soup kitchens, ensuring that people in his parish get clothes if they come to him, and so on. On the other, he starts setting up something akin to a cult, demanding a lot from the members of his church, eventually having them donate most of their belongings to the church so that they can be redistributed to the poorer members. This weird side of Jim Jones increases throughout the time, so in 1961 he has a vision of nuclear apocalypse, and he decides to move his church to California because he reads in a newspaper that California would be one of the best places to survive an apocalypse. Through the 60s and the 70s, he does really well in California. He expands into San Francisco and Los Angeles. Overall, he ends up with 6 churches under his control. He makes large sums of money, which is of course exempt from taxation as he is in a church. As he becomes more and more freaky, he starts claiming that he's able to heal through prayer. Nevertheless, a lot of the money is still going towards good causes, and he does aid the poor, drug addicts, orphans, etc. It is becoming more and more clear, however, that there is a cult forming around him. He by far rejects Christianity, throwing Bible on the ground during sermons. Instead, he talks about revolutionary ideas and Marxism. His closest followers become increasingly militarized. He fortifies his personal transport to be bulletproof. He had a lot of the followers donate their homes to the temple. He forces followers to give 1/4 of their income if they want to stay with him. Also, he spends the money to increase his influence, paying media outlets to portray him in a positive light, and he blocks articles that claim that he is running a cult. He helps the mayor of San Francisco get elected. However, by 1977, his luck is running out. In 1977, a hit piece on Jones finally gets published in New West magazine. It includes testimonies of ex-cult members. Let's go through some of these. So the most striking one is from Elmer and Dina Myrtle. They state that in the beginning, Jones was very friendly and compassionate towards them. Then mental abuse began. They would be insulted and humiliated by other members, after which Jones would come out and embrace them, telling them that he was proud that they endured it. This is pure brainwashing. Then physical abuse began. From being hit with a belt, to graduating onto being paddled up to 100 times. Jones had them write incriminating documents about themselves, so that when they quit the cult they had to change their names. Their daughter, who was 16 at the time, was also severely beaten by Jones once. Other notable claims include Jones warning other members that they would be killed if they left the cult, a care house for emotionally disturbed boys receiving money from the state, and Jones siphoning that money, leaving the boys with very little. Jones emotionally abusing an elderly woman by scaring her with a fucking snake. All the incriminating claims, as well as some of the other things that Jones did that aroused police suspicion, led to him fleeing the country in 1977. Him and the most devoted 900 followers embark upon a journey to a compound in Guyana. The compound was set up a few years prior by Jones. Basically, he was becoming paranoid and was talking to his members about how they were Jews and the state was Nazi Germany. He chose Guyana for a few reasons. One was that Guyanese law would not allow for him to be sent to the US if he was found committing a crime in the US. Another was that Guyana was a mixed-race country with some black leaders and also with a left-leaning government, both of which were things that Jones would have found important. Finally, the country spoke English. Also, it was a poor country, and Jones may have thought that he would be able to exert a lot of influence on it. The Guyanese government agreed to lease him land for a few reasons. For example, they gave him land in the west of the country. It was a remote jungle location with infertile soil. It was close to the disputed Venezuelan border, so essentially having 1,000 Americans there could have prevented Venezuela from pressing the dispute and attacking. After 900 residents moved into the compound, a lot more abuses happened. The followers were promised a utopian communist society. Instead, they were forced by Jones to work for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in the field. Later on, as Jones became seriously ill, the regime was relaxed to only 8 hours of work and 8 hours of study. Predictably, as the population of the compound skyrocketed from very few people living there before 1977 to over 900, people were forced into living in shared dorms in prison-like conditions. Children would be put in a well for the night if they misbehaved. Adults would be locked in a closet. Drugs were administered to some misbehaving followers. Jones also sexually abused some of the followers. Because the compound was in an isolated place, disease ran rampant. Security was maintained by armed followers. Johnson was falling increasingly more ill. It was then that he started conditioning his followers to the idea of mass suicide. So Jones was abusing his followers in a remote jungle location. All the while, Timothy Stoen was trying to get his son back. He was an ex-follower. His wife took his son to the compound, while Timothy was given custody of the son. Timothy campaigned extensively to get his son back. Eventually, Congressman Leo Ryan was convinced to go to the compound. He went there partially out of compassion for Stoen, partially because he was a San Francisco congressman and so felt obliged to look after his constituents, and partially because he was on a bunch of congressional committees and subcommittees concerned with Americans abroad. Ryan arrived by plane with a group of reporters and a few of the cultists' relatives. They landed in a town 6 miles or 10 kilometers away from the compound. They visited the compound twice over 2 days. While they did find the conditions in which the followers resided to be appalling, they also found that very few people actually wanted to leave the compound. Most seemed happy to be living there. This is partially because Jones had rehearsed with cultists how they should act if the congressman visited. On the second day of the visit, Ryan promised Jones that the report he would present to Congress would be relatively positive. He also asked to aid with the escorting of about a dozen followers who told Ryan that they wanted to leave. While Ryan and the followers were allowed to leave, Ryan was suddenly attacked by one of the followers with a knife. The attacker was tackled and Ryan was not hurt. As Ryan and the delegation of the few escaped followers headed out of the compound, some of the reporters that were with them were informed by the escaped followers that one of them did not seem like he was actually wanting to leave. He seemed to be a true believer and they were surprised that he went with them. It seemed like he was deliberately sent with them by Jones. So in the evening of the second day, just before the two planes were to take off from the jungle airport, 2 shooting attacks happened simultaneously. Around a smaller airplane, the true believer, that was actually sent by Jones, took out a concealed handgun and started shooting. The larger airplane was around the same time assaulted by a truck that came from the compound, where numerous members fired upon the ex-cultists and the reporters. At the smaller airplane, the true believer was overpowered and the truck left after a while. All in all, 5 people were killed, including Leo Ryan, who was the primary target. There were many wounded, who would be patched up by the locals, their wounds disinfected with rum. The larger plane was too damaged to take off. The survivors then spent a night hiding among the Guyanese folks. The next day, Guyanese army, informed by radio, arrived by train. The survivors were rescued. The Guyanese army marched towards the compound. What they saw was beyond all belief. They found all followers dead. They were forced to commit suicide by drinking grape flavor-aid laced with cyanide. All 918 followers, including 276 children, were killed. The children and their parents were poisoned first, while the militarized followers were the last. After all, they were needed to force those unwilling to commit suicide into doing it. Jim Jones himself took the poison, but he also shot himself in the head. The deaths were not pleasant, and they weren't quick. The cyanide took 40 minutes to kill the adults. Some of the followers were injected with the poison after refusing to drink it. The final moments, from Jones gathering his followers to most of them having drank the poison, have been recorded on an audio cassette. It is also known as the death tape. I will only play the first few minutes, because it does get quite dark towards the end of the tape. I feel like I have to play some of this recording to contrast the almost likable Jim Jones from the beginning with this mass murderer Jim Jones of the end.
How very much I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life. But in spite of all of that I've tried, a handful of our people with their lies have made our life impossible. There's no way to detach ourselves from what's happened today. Not only we're in a compound situation, not only are there those who have left and committed the betrayal of the century. Some have stolen children from others, and they're in pursuit right now to kill them because they stole their children. And we are sitting here waiting on a powder keg. I don't think this is what we want to do with our babies. I don't think that's what we had in mind to do with our babies. It was said by the greatest of prophets from time immemorial, no man takes my life from me, I lay my life down. So to sit here and wait for the catastrophe that's going to happen on that airplane, it's going to be a catastrophe. Almost happened here. Almost happened. The congressman was nearly killed here. But you can't steal people's children. You can't take off with people's children without expecting a violent reaction. And that's not so unfamiliar to us either. Even if we were Judeo-Christian, if we weren't communists, the world, the kingdom suffereth violence, and the violence shall take it by force. If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace. We've been so betrayed. We have been so terribly betrayed. But we tried, and as Jack Beam often said, I don't know where he's at right this moment. Where's Jack? He said, if this only worked one day, it was worthwhile. What's going to happen here in a matter of a few minutes is that one of those people on that plane is going to shoot the pilot. I know that. I didn't plan it, but I know it's going to happen. They're going to shoot that pilot, and down comes that plane into the jungle. And we had better not have any of our children left when it's over, because they'll parachute in here on us. I'm telling you just as plain as I know how to tell you, I've never lied to you. I never have lied to you. I know that's what's going to happen. That's what he intends to do, and he will do it. He'll do it. Fortunately, being so bewildered with many pressures on my brain, seeing all these people behave so treasonous, it was just too much for me to put together, but I now know what he was telling me, and it'll happen. If the plane gets in the air, even. So, my opinion is that we be kind to children and be kind to seniors and take the portion like they used to take in ancient Greece and step over quietly, because we are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive. Yes, Christine?
Is it too late for Russia?
Here's why it's too late for Russia. They killed. They started to kill. That's why it makes it too late for Russia. Otherwise, I'd said, Russia, you bet your life. But it's too late. I can't control these people. They're out there. They've gone with their guns, and it's too late. And once we kill anybody, at least that's the way I've always put my lot with you. If one of my people do something, it's me. Now they say I don't have to take the blame for this, but I don't live that way. They said, deliver up Ujara, who tried to get the man back here.